Good evening, my friends. It's Miss Ing from the Shaler North Hills Library. And tonight I wanted to read to you a biography that I found. It just recently came out. And it's about someone. I have loved his artwork for a long time. When I was a little kid, I used to love this guy's artwork because it's a little bit creepy, and I like things that are a little bit creepy. I'm strange. I like things that are super sweet, and I like things that are a little bit creepy too. But this guy's name was Edward Gorey. And if you have ever read the John Belair series, The House with the Clock on His Walls, he illustrated those, and he illustrated a bunch of other really cool books. And he wrote some books too. That are a little strange, and there's a link to his books on there too. And this is a story written about him, The Curious Story of Edward Gorey, Nonsense. It's written by Laurie Mortensen and illustrated by Chloe Bristol. And Ms. Bristol has done a great job being inspired by Gorey's own works, which you can see on that website that I linked to, that I'm going to link to. Greetings, dear reader. Since you are reading this book, it is clear as the dimple on your chin that you love words and pictures and words. Such nonsense. In the year 1925, a boy was born in Chicago who loved words and pictures too. A brilliant boy, an only boy, a dandy boy who looked out his window, drew sausage-shaped pictures of city-bound trains, and taught himself to read. And oh, he did read. He gobbled up adventures and mysteries, comics and poetry, the entire works of the French novelist Victor Hugo, for goodness sake. Remember The Hunchback of Notre Dame? That's him. He wrote that. Then one day, young Edward read the whimsical Alice in Wonderland and the frightfully gruesome Dracula, one after the other. And a strange combination that captured his imagination like a penguin sipping tea on a runaway train. For you see, while Alice was quaint and curious, Dracula was dark and disturbing. And this would change his life. Oh, pardon me. Did I mention his name was Edward Gorey? Did it change his life all at once? No, it did not. As you may have noticed, many things do not happen all at once. First, bright young Edward skipped grades, skip, and moved with his family 12 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Heavens to Betsy, that's a lot. Young Edward scribbled and sketched and scribbled wherever he were. And before he knew it, 18-year-old Edward was drafted into the army. An army is full of rules, where company clerk Edward filled dreary reports one after another. It was a ghastly place, he later recalled. By the time tall, skinny, furry-coated, ring-fingered, sneaker-footed Edward arrived at Harvard, he was following his own rules, so different from the campus crowds that passed him by in scruffy white shirts and ties. Who is that tall and spooky chap? But it was just Edward, being Edward, with a hat full of nonsense thrown in. So did those sweet and sinister books he'd read change his life now? No, they did not. But isn't patience a lovely thing? You see, at Harvard, Edward mingled with other writers and poets just like he, who tried on the arts like trunk full of clothes, poems, plays, prose. Edward wrote them all. Did he know that he wanted to do this with his life? Did he know what he wanted to do with his life at all? Alas and alack, he did not. In 1953, Edward moved to New York and got a job in the art department of a big book publisher. During the day, Edward worked on everyone else's books, laying out pages, drawing letters by hand, designing book covers, and illustrating. And then one day, Edward stopped and thought, What about the books he wanted to write? And that's when it happened. Voila! After work, Edward scribbled down stories the way he wanted to write them. When he finished a story, he illustrated each scene with a slow and careful hand. Stories that mingled sweetness and innocence, danger and darkness, all mixed up with his own brand of silliness. When publishers turned him down, Edward launched his own company, Fantord Press. No one had ever seen books like Edward's before. He wrote strange stories with curious titles like The Unstrung Harp, The Abandoned Sock, The Wuggly Ump, The Galoshes of Remorse, and The Gashly Crumb Times. Gashly Crumb Tinies. The worst sort of alphabet tale that began. A is for Amy, who fell down the stairs. B is for Basil, assaulted by bears. C is for Clara, who wasted away. D is for Desmond, thrown out of the sleigh. Sound like any children's books you know? Instead of drawing colorful, happy-go-lucky pictures, Edward used pen and ink to draw seas of sketchy black lines, as if the stories were set in a time and place long ago. Instead of publishing books with his real name, Edward Gorey, he often mixed up the letters in anagrams, making silly new names like Ogdrin Weary, Dreary Wodge, Regeria Dowdy, E.G. Deadworthy, Garrett Weedy, Drew Dog-Ear, Edgar E. Wordy, Wee Grandorty, Roy Grewdead, Wardole Edgley, and Eudora Regley. Oh my goodness, how many names could there be? Names as silly as the ones in his books like Octavia Prong and Willaboo Lake, Waffle, Scrump, Humglum, and Crunk. It was all part of the nonsense. Some people did not like his stories. Why would anyone write such stories with such odd and unfortunate endings? His book, The Beastly Baby, made some mothers go mad. They ripped it to shreds and they mailed it back to him. Humph! But Edward liked writing and illustrating stories that made readers uneasy. To Edward, the world was an uncertain place where anything might happen. And in Edward's stories, it did. Anything less would be boring. Who wanted that? Not Edward. People often asked him what his stories meant, but Edward didn't like explaining this and that. He thought readers should use their own imaginations. So tall, skinny, furry-coated, ring-fingered, sneaker-footed Edward wrote stories with sketchy black lines just the way he imagined them. It was just Edward being Edward, with a hatful of nonsense thrown in. And that is Nonsense, the Curious Story of Edward Gorey. And I hope that you are curious about all of the things in this wonderful and uncertain, but still wonderful world. And I love your imaginations. And I love that you express your kindness in so many different ways. And so, little dreamers and big dreamers, as you drift off to sleep this evening, might you first kiss your beautiful brains, kiss your loving hearts, and when you look in that mirror, you say, hey, good looking. Just be you being you. You're good looking, inside and out, just the way you are. Good night, friends. See you tomorrow. Thanks.